My name is Jacob Peterson, and I'm 65 years old. The story I'm about to tell you is not about grief. It's about war. It began 1 week after I buried my wife of 40 years. My son and my daughter-in-law called an inheritance meeting. They sat across from me in the boardroom, built on my sweat and my wife's soul, and made their demand. My daughter-in-law, Brenda, smiled a smile colder than a Chicago winter and said, "Now that the old woman is gone, you'll sign the company over to my husband and learn to fend for yourself." I smiled right back, because what she didn't know was that my lawyer was about to walk in, not with a will, but with a single sealed envelope, a document that would unravel a 40-year-old secret and burn her entire world to the ground. If you believe that loyalty is earned, not inherited, hit that like button and subscribe because you're going to want to see how this ends. The appearance of Kenji Ishiawa was like dropping a block of ice into a glass of whiskey. The room, already cold, became glacial. Brenda shot him. A look, a flicker of irritation crossing her perfectly made-up face. She hadn't anticipated him. This was supposed to be her ambush, a swift, clean strike against a grieving old man. Her voice was laced with sarcasm. Kenji, what a surprise. I wasn't aware this family meeting required legal counsel. I kept my own voice flat, devoid of emotion. This isn't a family meeting. Brenda, you just made that clear. This is business, and Kenji is the company's lawyer. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. He's always present for important business meetings. Kenji gave a professional nod, but said nothing. He placed his leather briefcase beside his chair, but remained standing, a silent, imposing presence. He knew his role right now was to be a witness. My son Ryan shifted in his seat, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Dad," what Brenda meant was, Brenda cut him off without a second glance. "What I mean is perfectly clear. Ryan, don't complicate it." She turned her focus back to me, her smile gone, replaced by the predatory look of a corporate raider. "Jake, let's be practical. Carol is gone. The heart of this company is gone. People need stability. The board, the investors, the employee. They need to see a clear line of succession. Ryan has been the COO for 10 years. This is the next logical step. It's what Carol would have wanted for the company she built to stay with her son. Her legacy. Her legacy. She dared to use that word. She dared to invoke Carol's name to justify her own naked greed. A hot surge of anger coiled in my gut, but I pushed it down. To get angry now was to lose. Carol had taught me that. Never let them see you sweat. She used to say, let them see you think. I looked at Ryan. My son, is that what you think? Ryan, you think your mother would want me to hand over everything she and I bled for just a week after her funeral? He swallowed hard, his eyes darting away from mine. I, I'm just thinking about the stability of the company. Dad, people are worried. Mom, she always said family came first. Yes, Carol always said family came first. But her definition of family was built on loyalty, respect, and hard work, not on lazy entitlement disguised as birthright. I looked at the two of them sitting there in their expensive clothes in the mahogany paneled boardroom that cost more than the house Carol and I first bought. And a memory hit me so hard it almost knocked the wind out of me. Carol and I, 40 years ago, on the floor of our tiny rented apartment, spreading bills out on the carpet, trying to figure out how to pay them all. I remembered the smell of truck grease that never seemed to wash off from under my fingernails after a 16-hour day driving the one beat-up rig we owned. We bought it with a second mortgage on a house we could barely afford. Ryan's hands, They've never held anything heavier than a 5 iron. I took a deep breath, pulling myself back to the present. Why the rush? Brenda, I asked the question. It seemed to throw her. She was expecting an argument, a fight, not a simple, logical question. It isn't a rush. She snapped back a little too quickly. It's being decisive. The market doesn't wait for grief. Jake, our competitors will see your hesitation as a weakness. We need a strong leader at the helm, not someone who's distracted. She said that last word with a disgusting amount of fake pity. Distracted? I raised an eyebrow. I was burying my wife. That's not a distraction. Brenda, it's called being human. You should try it sometime. The tension in the room crackled. Ryan looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Brenda's eyes narrowed. The mask was slipping. You know exactly what I mean. You're 65. You're tired. For the last few months, while Carol was sick, you let things slide at the company. Everyone saw it. The performance reports don't lie. And there it was. Her trump card. She'd been gathering her ammunition. She'd been planning this for months. Just waiting for the moment my wife took her last breath. The sheer coldness of it was breathtaking. I stood up, planting my palms flat on the gleaming surface of the table. I could feel the weight of 40 years in that wood. I have given my entire life to this company, I said, my voice low, but carrying to every corner of the room. I was here when it was one truck and a dream. I was here when we landed our first major contract. I was here when we almost went bankrupt in 2008. And I was here holding the hand of the woman who built this with me during her final days. And I don't regret a single second of it. I locked my eyes on Brenda's. I'm not going anywhere. I am the CEO and chairman of the board of Peterson Freight. Ryan will remain the COO. That is final. I turned to my lawyer. Thank you for coming. Kenji. It was a dismissal. Kenji nodded and began to pack his briefcase. Brenda shot up from her chair, her face flushed with rage. You can't do this. The board. I cut her off. I own 51% of the voting shares. Brenda, I am the board. This meeting is over. A dead silence fell. Brenda stared at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. Her confidence was gone, replaced by the raw fury of a predator who has had her kill snatched away. Fine, she hissed, her voice dripping venom. Play it that way, old man. We'll see how long you last when the board sees your latest performance reviews. You're a relic, Jake, and relics belong in a museum, not in the CEO's chair. With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out, dragging a stunned and silent Ryan behind her. The slam of the door echoed in the silence. I stood alone in the vast empty room, the grief for my wife, a weight I thought couldn't get any heavier, was now compounded by the bitter taste of betrayal. I sank back into my chair, suddenly feeling every one of my 65 years. Brenda was right about one thing. I was tired, but she was wrong about everything else. I was no relic, and this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a war that Carol, in her own brilliant way, had already prepared me to win. I didn't go home after the meeting. I couldn't. The silence in that house, the house I had shared with Carol for 30 years, would have been too loud. Instead, I drove to a small, dimly lit coffee shop in a part of town Brenda wouldn't be caught dead in. It smelled of old books and burnt coffee. It was perfect. Start with any vendors or consultants who've been hired without my direct approval, any new accounts that were opened in the last 18 months. I want to know who they're talking to, who they're paying. I leaned back, the vinyl of the booth creaking under my weight. Brenda thinks I'm a relic. She thinks I'm too lost in my grief to see what she's doing. I want you to use that. Let her think I'm weak. while she's planning her coronation. I want you to build her gallows." Kenji simply nodded, writing it all down. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask if I was sure. 20 years as my lawyer. He knew how I operated. He knew that when I gave an order like this, it was because the war had already begun. As I watched him make his notes, my mind drifted. Carol's face appeared in my memory as clear as if she were sitting right next to me. I remembered a conversation we had about a year ago, sitting on our back porch watching the sunset. I had just approved a new marketing initiative that Ryan and Brenda had pitched. I was proud of Ryan for taking the lead, but Carol had been quiet, a small, thoughtful frown on her face. "What is it, honey?" I had asked. She had looked at me, her eyes which could see right through anyone filled with a familiar worry. "It's Brenda," she had said softly. "I don't trust her. Jake." I had sighed. It was an old argument. She's ambitious. Carol, that's a good thing she pushes Ryan. Carol had shaken her head slowly. "No, it's more than ambition." She looks at Ryan and she doesn't see a husband. She sees a stock option. She looks at Peterson Freight and she doesn't see a family legacy. She sees a prize to be won. I had dismissed it at the time, told her she was being too harsh, that she was just being a protective mother. Now sitting in that dingy coffee shop, her words echoed in my head with the force of a prophecy. She had seen it all. She had seen the vulture in Brenda long before I did. I had been blinded by my love for my son and my desire for a peaceful family. I see now, she wasn't being harsh. She was being observant, and I had let her down by not listening. A wave of regret washed over me, so powerful it almost took my breath away. But regret wouldn't win this fight. Kenji looked up from his notebook, his expression serious. "I'll get started immediately. Jake, I'll be discreet. They won't see it coming." I gave him a grim nod. "Good," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "Make sure of it." This was for Carol. I would not let the woman who saw my son as a stock option inherit the empire my wife had helped me build. I would protect her legacy, even if it meant tearing my own family apart to do it. 3 days passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I went to the office. I signed papers. I sat in meetings and nodded at projections on a screen that meant nothing to me. Every face I saw was a question. Was this person loyal? Did they know what Brenda and Ryan were planning? The entire company, my life's work, suddenly felt like a hostile country. I was sleeping in my home office on a leather couch that smelled of old paper and Carol's faint perfume. I couldn't bear our bedroom. Not yet. On the fourth day, my phone rang. A private number. It was Kenji. His voice on the other end was stripped of all warmth. A flat, sterile instrument of fact. "Jake," he said, "I found something. It's bad." I sat up straight, my heart starting a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. "How bad?" I asked my own voice, a low rasp. I heard the rustle of papers on his end. "It's a shell corporation registered in Delaware." "Of course. It's called B&R Consulting. B&R, Brenda and Ryan." The arrogance of it was like a slap in the face. They didn't even try to be clever. They were so sure I was a spent force, a sleeping lion they could rob without fear. My hand tightened on the phone, the plastic groaning in protest. "Go on," I said through clenched teeth. Kenji laid it out with the cold precision of a surgeon dissecting a tumor. For the past 22 months, B&R Consulting had been submitting monthly invoices to Peterson Freight. The charges were for vague, intangible services, market trend analysis, supply chain optimization reports, logistical strategy advisement. Each invoice was for an amount just under the threshold that would require my personal signature, an amount that Ryan, as chief operating officer, could approve on his own. My own son. He was the key that opened the vault. Kenji continued. The reports they supposedly provided are non-existent. I checked with the department heads. They've never heard of B&R Consulting. They never received any such analysis. These were ghost services. Jake, just a pipeline to drain money from the company. I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea rolling through me. It wasn't just greed. This was a profound betrayal, a meticulous, long-term deception. While I was taking Carol to chemotherapy appointments, while I was holding her hand as she slept, they were writing fake invoices. They were stealing from her, from us. How much? Kenji, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I needed to know the number. I needed to know the exact price of their betrayal. There was a pause, and I could hear him take a breath. The total amount paid from Peterson Freight to B&R Consulting over the last 22 months. He said, each word a hammer blow is $812,450. The number hung in the air, obscene and monstrous, over $800,000. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful, of Carol looking over a quarterly report about a year ago. She had a small frown on her face. This consulting fee seems high, Jake, she had said, pointing to a line item. I had glanced at it, seen Ryan's signature, and dismissed it. It's that new efficiency firm Ryan hired. I'd told her. He says they're worth every penny. The shame of that moment burned in my throat now. She had seen it. Of course she had. She saw everything. And I hadn't listened. Where did the money go? I asked Kenji, my voice now cold as steel. The grief in my chest was beginning to crystallize into something harder, something sharper. The B&R account is registered to a P. Box, Kenji said, but I traced the outflows. Large wire transfers. One was a down payment on a vacation home, a ski chalet in Aspen, Colorado. Another paid in full for a brand new Porsche 911. The cars registered in Brenda's name. Aspen, a Porsche. They weren't just stealing to build a nest egg. They were living a fantasy life on a foundation of lies, funded by the company his mother had given her life to build. They were laughing at us. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city lights of Chicago. I want more Kenji, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. This is a good start, but I want everything. I want to know where every single dime went. I want the deed to the house, the title to the car, the credit card statements linked to the account. I want a timeline of every purchase they made with that stolen money. Get it all. I'm already on it. Jake, he replied, consider it done. I hung up the phone and stood there for a long time, watching the city breathe below me. The grief was still there, a cold stone in my chest, but now it had a new companion, a cold, clear, and righteous anger. The rules of engagement had changed. This was no longer a boardroom dispute. This was a crime scene. And I was done being the victim. The $800,000 was a body blow, but it wasn't the knockout punch. It was ugly. A straightforward case of embezzlement, but it felt incomplete. It felt like a symptom of a deeper disease. Brenda was greedy, yes. Ryan was weak, yes, but Carol had been suspicious before the stealing had gotten this bad. I remembered her frown a year ago. She wasn't just worried about consulting fees. She was worried about something more fundamental. The money explained Brenda's motive, but it didn't explain Carol's deep, quiet fear in her final months. I needed to understand what Carol knew, and Kenji, with all his financial trackers, couldn't find that. There was only one person left who had been inside that room with us, someone who had seen the unfiltered truth of our family's final days. Maria Sanchez, Carol's private nurse. I drove to her house in Pilsen, a small, neat brick bungalow on a street lined with families. It was a world away from the cold glass and steel of my downtown office. I found her in her small, immaculate garden, tending to her roses. When she saw me, her eyes normally so bright filled with a deep sadness. She was a woman of 60 with a kind face etched with laugh lines, but now those lines just looked tired. She wiped her hands on her apron and came to me, pulling me into a hug that felt more real than any I had received in weeks. "Jacob," she said, her voice thick, "I am so, so sorry for your loss." She was a light. We sat on her small porch drinking chamomile tea she insisted on making. For a few minutes, we just talked about Carol, not the CEO, not the matriarch, but the woman. The woman who loved bad detective novels. The woman who hummed Frank Sinatra songs off key when she was concentrating. The woman who knew the names of all Maria's grandchildren and asked about them every single day. "She adored you, Maria," I said, my own voice rough with an emotion I hadn't let myself feel in days. "You were more than her nurse. You were her best friend." Maria's eyes watered. She dabbed at them with a tissue. "And she was mine," she whispered. "In those last months, we talked about everything. Life, death, our children." She looked up, her gaze suddenly sharp. "She was so proud of you, Jacob, how you built everything from nothing. But she was worried." My heart quickened. This was it. "Worried?" I prompted gently, not wanting to scare her off. "About what?" Maria hesitated, twisting the tissue in her hands. She looked down at her lap. She made me promise not to say anything. She did not want to cause you more pain. You were already carrying so much." "Maria," I leaned forward, my hands clasping on the table between us. "Whatever it is, I need to know. Brenda and Ryan, they are trying to take the company. They are saying I'm not fit to run it. They say it's what Carol would have wanted." Maria's head snapped up, her sadness replaced by a sudden fierce anger that took me by surprise. "What?" she gasped. "That is a lie, a wicked lie." She clutched the cross around her neck. She was worried about them. She was worried about what they would do after she was gone. She was breathing hard now, her loyalty to Carol overriding any promise of silence. "She changed in the last 2 months. Jacob, she became secretive. She started having private calls with your lawyer, Mr. Ishikawa. She would make me leave the room. She had me bring her old boxes from the attic, company papers, ledgers, things from years and years ago. I I thought she was just reminiscing." Maria's eyes filled with tears again, but it wasn't reminiscing. It was an investigation. She would sit up late with her magnifying glass, going over these old documents. She would get so tired, but she wouldn't stop. She kept muttering, "It doesn't add up. It just doesn't add up." My blood ran cold. She had been investigating them. While she was dying, she was using the last of her strength to find the truth she felt, but couldn't yet prove. And I pushed. Did she find what she was looking for? Maria shook her head, her face a mask of confusion. "I don't know. She never told me. But there is one more thing." She stood up, her expression suddenly fearful, as if she was breaking a sacred oath. "She made me promise." She said, "Maria, if anything happens, if they move against him, and if Jake ever needs to know the whole truth, I want you to give him this." She went inside her small house. I could hear her moving around, opening a drawer, her footsteps hesitant. She came back out a moment later. Her hand was clenched tight. She opened it and placed a single small tarnished key on the table between us. It wasn't a house key. It looked like a key to a safe deposit box. She told me, "Do not give it to him unless he is in trouble. He will be in pain. I don't want to add to it if I don't have to. But if he needs to fight, this will be his shield and his sword." Those were her exact words. Jacob, I stared at the key. It was so small, so insignificant, but I could feel the weight of it, the weight of my wife's love and her foresight. She hadn't just been suspicious. She had been planning. She had been laying a path for me, a set of breadcrumbs to follow from beyond the grave. The $800,000 was just the beginning. This key, this key was the real story. She said you would know where it belongs, Marie whispered. She said it was to an old box she kept at the First National Bank downtown, a box she opened before you were even married. I picked up the key, its cold metal biting into my palm, a box from before our marriage, a secret Carol had kept for over 40 years. The fight wasn't just about money anymore. It was about a truth Carol had died protecting, and I was about to unearth it. Thank you, Maria, I said, my voice thick. You have no idea what you've done. She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. God bless you, Jacob. Now go and fight for her. The next morning, I was at the First National Bank on LaSalle Street right as it opened. The key felt heavy in my pocket, a small piece of metal that held the weight of an entire lifetime. I was led by a stern-looking woman in a navy blue suit into the vault. The air was cold, sterile, and silent, broken only by the sound of our footsteps on the marble floor and the mechanical click of the vault's massive circular door. She led me to a wall of brushed steel boxes and indicated a small one near the bottom. This is box 31B, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. It was opened in 1979, before I even met Carol. A cold dread washed over me. What had she been hiding from me from the very beginning? I was left alone in a small private viewing room. Just me, a desk, a chair, and the heavy cold metal box. My hands were trembling slightly as I took out the tarnished key. It fit perfectly. I inserted my own key from the bank, turned them both, and heard a satisfying heavy thunk. The lock was open. I pulled the long, narrow box out of its slot. It was heavier than I expected. I placed it on the desk and just stared at it for a moment. This was it, the sword and the shield, the whole truth that Carol was so afraid to burden me with. I lifted the lid. There was no velvet lining, no glittering jewels, no stacks of cash. It was just full of paper, old yellowed paper that smelled of dust and time. My eyes scanned the contents, my heart hammering in my chest. At the top was a small faded photograph of a young Carol, one I had never seen before, looking beautiful but impossibly sad. Beneath it, a bundle of letters tied with a faded silk ribbon, and under those two official-looking documents, I picked up the first one. It was a birth certificate. My breath hitched. The name on it was Ryan Peterson, my son. I ran my finger down the lines past his date of birth to the space for the parents' names. Father Jacob Peterson, and then I looked at the line for mother. The name written there in crisp typed ink was not Carol. It was a name from a life I had buried 45 years ago, a name I never ever thought I would see again. My blood turned to ice. It didn't make sense. And then I saw the second document. It was a set of adoption papers dated 6 months later, legally transferring all parental rights of the child, Ryan Peterson, to one Carol Chenoweth. At the very bottom of the box, almost hidden, was a small leather-bound diary. I recognized Carol's handwriting on the first page, but it was the looping, hopeful script of a young woman I had just started to fall in love with. The fraud, the $800,000, All of it evaporated from my mind. This was the real secret, and I was about to read it in her own words. My hands were shaking. I opened the small leather-bound book. The first page was dated April 10th, 1983, just 2 months before were supposed to get married. Her handwriting was the looping, hopeful script of the woman I was falling in love with. I started to read, and my world tilted on its axis. I found out today, she wrote, Jake, my Jake, the man I'm going to build my life with, had a moment of weakness, a mistake, a stupid, drunken mistake 9 months ago that I could have forgiven. I could have screamed and cried, and we would have moved past it, but it's not just a mistake anymore. That mistake has a name. His name is Ryan. He has a child with a woman from his past, a woman he swore meant nothing, a woman who showed up on his doorstep today holding a baby. I had to stop my breath catching in my throat. I remembered that day, the sheer animal panic. I had told Carol, but I hadn't told her everything. I had told her it was a lie, a shakedown. I had lied to her. I read on my shame, a physical weight in my chest. He lied to me. The next entry read, a few days later, the ink was darker, pressed harder into the page. He stood in our kitchen and lied to my face. He said she was desperate that the child wasn't his. But I saw his eyes. Jake is a terrible liar. I knew he was telling me what I wanted to hear, not what was true. So, I did something I'm not proud of. I followed him. I followed him to a rundown apartment complex on the south side. I watched him hand her a wad of cash, and I saw her, the mother. She was broken, thin, with eyes so hollow they looked like holes in her face. And then I saw the baby, him, just a tiny thing in a dirty blanket. He wasn't just a mistake. He was a person, a tiny innocent person. He's my son. He's Jake's son, and he's being raised in a place with no hope. I haven't slept in 3 days. The lie is sitting between us at the dinner table, but it's not the lie that's keeping me awake. It's the baby's face. I can't get it out of my head. My vision blurred. I had to wipe my eyes. I never knew. I never knew she had done that. I thought I had handled it, paid the woman off, and that she had disappeared. I was a fool. A young, arrogant fool. The next entry was a week later. I confronted him today. I told him I knew. I told him I knew Ryan was his son. I have never seen a man break like that. He fell apart right in front of me. He confessed everything. The shame, the stupidity, the fear. He was terrified of losing me. And in that moment, seeing him so broken, my anger just evaporated. It didn't disappear. It just changed. It turned into a terrible, heavy sadness because I had a choice to make. A choice that would define the rest of my life. I could leave. I could walk away from this man I loved. This man who had betrayed me. And I would be justified. Everyone would say I did the right thing. Or I could stay. I could forgive an unforgivable act. I could raise another woman's child as my own. I went to see her again, the mother without Jake. I went and I talked to her. She doesn't want him. Not really. She wants money. She wants a different life. She looked at this beautiful baby boy, and all she saw was a millstone around her neck. And in that moment, I knew he wasn't her son. He was mine. Today I made my choice. I sat Jake down. I told him my terms. We will adopt the child. We will pay the mother, and she will sign away her rights, and she will disappear forever. And Ryan will be our son, my son. We will raise him and love him and give him the life he deserves. But there is one condition, my one unbreakable condition. He will never, ever know the truth. He will never know he is the product of my husband's greatest shame. He will only know that he is my son and that I love him. I am not doing this for Jake. I am not doing this for me. I am doing this for the boy. I am building our family on a foundation of forgiveness. I will make this our strength, not our weakness. I will love this child so fiercely that the lie becomes the truth. He will be my son. The pages that followed were a blur of legal meetings, adoption papers, and then joy. Entries about his first steps, his first word, mama. She had circled it, underlining it 3 times. The diary was full of her love for him, a love so pure, so absolute, that I had never for 1 second in 40 years doubted it. She hadn't just adopted him. She had claimed him with a love more powerful than blood. I read for an hour, my hands tracing her script. Near the end, there was an entry from just 5 years ago after Ryan and Brenda's wedding. Brenda, I don't know about this girl. There is something hard about her, something calculating. I see the way she looks at Ryan, not with love, but with ambition, like he's a stepping stone. It worries me. He is a good boy, my boy, but he is soft. He has never had to fight for anything. I've made sure of that. Maybe, maybe I made him too soft. Maybe in protecting him from the truth, I forgot to teach him how to see it in others. I closed the book. My body was shaking, not with anger, but with a profound, earth-shattering awe. The woman I had loved for 40 years, the woman I had mourned for a week, was a giant. Her capacity for love, for forgiveness, was something I couldn't even comprehend. She hadn't just forgiven my betrayal. She had taken my greatest shame, my deepest secret, and she had transformed it into our family. She had built our entire life on an act of impossible grace. And now, the very son she had saved, the son she had loved as her own, was siding with a woman who wanted to destroy everything she had built. The stealing, the $800,000, it was all layered on top of this. A betrayal of a sacrifice I had never even known she'd made. I sat there in the cold, silent vault, holding the diary to my chest, and for the first time since her funeral, I wept. I wept for her strength. I wept for my own blindness. And I wept for the son I was about to lose. I spent the next 2 days in a daze. The world outside my window moved on, but I was trapped in the cold, silent vault of the First National Bank, reading my wife's words over and over. Her diary sat on the mahogany desk in my home office, a silent testament to a 40-year-old act of love. I would pick it up, trace her handwriting with my fingertips, and try to comprehend the sheer scale of her sacrifice. The house no longer felt just empty. It was filled with the ghost of a truth I never knew existed. The doorbell rang on the third evening, a sharp, impatient sound that sliced through my quiet contemplation. I knew who it was before I even looked at the security camera. I opened the door, and Brenda pushed past me without a word, her face a mask of thunder. Ryan followed her and looking like a teenager who had been dragged to the principal's office. What the hell is this? Jake? Brenda began spinning around to face me in the foyer. She didn't even bother with a greeting. My corporate American Express was declined at Nordstrom. Nort out. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Ryan, looking miserable, chimed in. Dad, some of my accounts are frozen. 2. Kenji's office sent a memo. We can't approve the new fleet purchase. We can't even approve payroll for the West Coast Logistics Department. What is going on? Brenda sneered, taking a step closer. This is your little game, isn't it? You lost in the boardroom. So now you're going to burn the whole company down out of pure spite. Is this your grand plan to drive Peterson freight into the ground just so we can't have it? Carol would. In the subway, my son-in-law and daughter pushed me onto the tracks right in front of the train. I lay between the tracks, hearing the subway train roar at 50 miles per hour while they stood and smiled, waiting for my demise. The betrayal by my loved ones tore my heart apart. But when the train passed, I calmly got up, dusted off my clothes, and whispered 4 words that turned their lives into an eternal nightmare. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The elevator doors slid open on the 12th floor, and I heard voices before I saw anyone. The insurance meeting had wrapped up faster than expected. Carmichael signed without the usual haggling, so I'd returned to the office 90 minutes early on that Tuesday afternoon in January. My good mood dissolved the moment I recognized my son-in-law's voice, drifting from the half-open conference room door. How much longer do we wait? He's 62. This could drag on another decade. I stopped mid-stride. The leather portfolio under my arm suddenly felt heavy. He built this place. You know he'll never voluntarily step aside. That was Catherine, my daughter. Her voice carried that clipped impatience she'd inherited from her mother. I stepped back into the elevator, alcove, hidden from view, but close enough to hear Wesley's response. Then we need to accelerate the timeline. There are legal options. The conference room door swung partially closed, muffling the rest. I caught fragments. Make sure everything transfers smoothly when the words hit like cold water. 30 seconds passed. I counted them, forcing my breathing to stay even. Then I walked toward the conference room with deliberate footsteps, leather soles announcing my presence against the polished floor. When I entered, Wesley and Catherine jerked their heads toward me. Wesley's hand moved quickly, sliding a stack of legal documents into a folder. Working late? I thought you'd both left for the day. I kept my voice casual, conversational. Wesley recovered smoothly, just reviewing Q4 projections, some concerning trends. Anything requiring my immediate attention? Nothing urgent. We'll discuss at Thursday's meeting. I nodded, noting how Catherine wouldn't meet my eyes. The manila folder sat between them like evidence at a crime scene. Whatever I'd interrupted, they both knew I'd heard something, and we all pretended otherwise. 2 hours later, I sat across from Wesley in the executive dining room on the 15th floor. The January sun slanted through floor to ceiling windows, harsh and cold. Catherine had joined us, picking at her salad, while Wesley launched into what he probably thought was a careful pitch. The industry is changing fast. Younger leadership brings fresh perspective. I cut my steak methodically, keeping my hands steady. I've adapted to every change in 30 years. What makes this different? No offense, but traditional methods don't work anymore. He paused, searching for diplomatic phrasing. Old, you can say it. Established, set in your ways. The company needs room to evolve. I placed my fork down deliberately, the small clink against china marking a shift in the conversation. My will is clear. After I'm gone, everything passes to Catherine, managed by you. Until then, I run this company. Wesley leaned forward, invading the space across the table. His voice dropped lower, harder. That's not good enough. We need control now. Need or want? His jaw clenched. The careful mask he'd been wearing cracked slightly. You're making a mistake. Holding on too tight breaks things. I maintained steady eye contact. Are you threatening me? Wesley? Before he could answer, Catherine spoke up. Dad, you're being unreasonable. We're family. Why can't you trust us? Something twisted in my chest, but I kept my voice level. Trust is earned through actions, not demanded through blood. You've never believed in me. Her fingers twisted her wedding ring round and round. Never thought I was capable. I gave you a position. You chose to use it against me. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping backward. Wesley rose with her, towering over me for a moment in what I recognized as a calculated power display. Wesley's right, Catherine said, her voice tight. You'll regret pushing us away. They gathered their things, Wesley, slapping his folder against the table with more force than necessary, and left. Catherine hesitated at the door, glancing back once. Whatever guilt flickered across her face vanished quickly when Wesley called her name from the hallway. I sat alone at the table. My coffee had gone cold. Through the windows, the city sprawled beneath us, indifferent to the small drama playing out on the 15th floor. An ambulance siren wailed somewhere far below, fading into the general noise. 30 years building something real, and they wanted it handed over like car keys. Back in my office, I locked the door, something I rarely did. The click of the deadbolt felt significant, permanent. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk, the one that required a key I kept on a chain. Inside were corporate financial records, expense reports, vendor contracts. I spread the latest expense reports across the mahogany surface. My finger traced a line of transactions marked with Wesley's approval signature. Med Supply Solutions, amounts ranging from $3 to $8,000 recurring monthly. I pulled out my vendor contracts, flipping through until I found the medical equipment suppliers we'd used for years. Med Supply Solutions wasn't listed. The numbers didn't align with any contract I'd authorized. Small enough amounts to slip past cursory review, large enough to add up over time. I sat back in my chair, the leather creaking. That conversation I'd overheard wasn't casual complaining. It was scheming. Accelerate the timeline. Legal options. What exactly had they been planning before I interrupted? I thought I knew my daughter. I thought I'd trained Wesley well, brought him into the business, given him opportunities. I'd been wrong about both of them. My hand rested on a folder embossed with the Ellis Healthcare Group logo. My creation built from nothing over 3 decades. The winter light was fading now, casting long shadows across the office. I looked at the framed photographs on my wall, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, community awards, medical conferences. Wesley had waved dismissively at those photos during a meeting last month. At the time, I thought he was just being careless. Now I understood it was contempt. I pulled my phone from my pocket and photographed the expense reports, each page clearly showing Wesley's signature. Then I returned everything to the drawer and locked it again. Through my office window, I could see the lights of Manhattan flickering to life as darkness settled over the city. Somewhere in this building, Wesley and Catherine were probably celebrating what they thought was my weakness, my sentimentality, my unwillingness to see what they were really doing. They wanted the company. Fine. I spoke aloud to the empty office, my voice steady and cold. You want the company? Let's see if you can handle what comes next. I opened my laptop and created a new folder. Q1 Audit Prep. Innocent enough. Inside. I began documenting everything I'd noticed. Every conversation, every irregularity. If they wanted to play this game, They discover I'd been playing longer than I'd been alive. 3 weeks crawled past. February arrived with dirty snow piling against Manhattan curbs and a coldness that had nothing to do with weather. I'd been coming to the office earlier each morning, often arriving by 7, sometimes earlier. The townhouse on the Upper East Side, my property, my name on the deed, had become uncomfortable. Wesley and Catherine lived there, too, an arrangement that had seemed practical when I'd offered it 2 years ago. Now it felt like enemy territory. I kept my distance. Let them think I was retreating. Let them believe I was just an old man clinging to past glories, too stubborn to recognize reality. Meanwhile, I documented everything. On a gray Tuesday morning in early February, I pushed through the revolving doors of the Ellis Healthcare Group headquarters at 6:45. The lobby was empty except for security. I rode the elevator to 12, expecting the usual silence of an office not yet awake. Instead, lights blazed in the main conference room. Through the glass walls, I saw Wesley standing at the head of the table, my usual position, addressing 3 of our clinic directors. Sandra Chen wasn't among them, notable since she'd been my most trusted operational manager for a decade. I didn't hesitate. I walked straight into the conference room. The conversation died mid-sentence. Wesley's expression flickered. Surprise, then annoyance, then that smooth, professional mask he wore. So, well, morning meeting. I kept my tone neutral, almost pleasant. Initiative I'm leading, Wesley said. He didn't move from the head of the table, didn't want to bother you with details. The 3 clinic directors looked uncomfortable. Marcus Washington, who'd been with me since the beginning, stared at his notepad. Any meeting involving my clinic directors requires my approval. I let each word land clearly. We're just discussing operational improvements. Nothing that affects strategy. I turned to the directors. I'll expect full notes on my desk within the hour. They nodded, avoiding Wesley's glare. I left without another word, but I had made my point. Whatever Wesley had told them about upcoming organizational changes and new reporting structure, they now understood I wasn't going anywhere. That evening, I returned to the townhouse later than usual. Catherine's coat hung in the hallway, but when I called out, she didn't answer. I found a note on the kitchen counter in her handwriting. Working late. Don't wait up. She was home. I'd seen her silhouette pass across the upstairs hallway window. I climbed the stairs to my private study, the room I'd used for decades, filled with medical journals and family photographs from better times. The door was open. Wesley sat at my desk, papers spread across the surface, using my space without permission. That's my desk. Wesley. He didn't look up immediately, making me wait. When he finally raised his eyes, there was no apology in them, just needed space to work. Thought you'd be at the office longer. This is my home, my private office. Technically, it's the family home. He gestured vaguely at the walls. We all live here. I felt my jaw tighten. My name on the deed says otherwise. He gathered his papers slowly, deliberately taking his time. As he passed me in the doorway, he paused. You should really think about what we discussed. This doesn't have to be difficult. I didn't respond. After he left, I looked at my desk. He'd rearranged items, small changes, but noticeable. Territorial marking like an animal claiming space. I began arriving at the office before Wesley every morning after that. Started locking files in my personal safe, documents he'd previously been able to access. Changed passwords on company systems. Small defensive moves that added up to a fortress. Mid-February, I stayed late, reviewing monthly financial reports. The office was silent, except for the hum of heating vents and distant traffic. I pulled up the expense tracking system, sorting by approver. There it was again, Med Supply Solutions. Another payment, this time $7,800. I cross. Referenced procurement contracts. Nothing. No authorized agreement. No competitive bid. No signed terms. But Wesley's digital signature appeared on every approval. I photographed each screen with my phone, making sure the dates and amounts were clearly visible. Then I pulled vendor registration documents. Med Supply Solutions had been added to our approved vendor list 8 months ago. The authorization, Wesley Chambers, Chief Operating Officer. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, small amounts designed to slip past audits, recurring charges that looked legitimate on surface review. But when you added them up over 8 months, they totaled nearly $50,000 paid to a company that didn't match any service we'd actually received. Whatever Wesley was planning, he needed money, and he was stealing it from the company he wanted to inherit. 2 days later, I received a call from Gerald Thompson, our largest insurance partner. We'd worked together for 15 years, built a strong relationship through consistent performance and mutual respect. Lemuel, good to hear your voice. I wanted to follow up on our conversation last week. I frowned. We didn't speak last week. Gerald, pause. Oh. Wesley said he mentioned you'd be stepping back soon. Wanted to make sure I understood the transition plan. My hand tightened on the phone. There are no transitions planned. Wesley spoke without authority. That's awkward. He seemed quite certain about the timeline. I'll address this internally. Our partnership remains unchanged. After we hung up, I sat staring at my office wall. Wesley wasn't just undermining me privately anymore. He was actively telling our partners I was leaving, creating the narrative before reality had a chance to interfere. I found him in his office an hour later. He was on his cell phone, laughing at something the person on the other end said. When he saw me in the doorway, his expression shifted to professional neutrality. I'll call you back, he said into the phone, then to me. Something wrong? You told Thompson I'm retiring. I'm not. He shrugged, entirely unrepentant. I said transitions eventually happen. He asked about succession planning. I answered honestly. Honestly, you implied it's imminent. You can't run this forever. Lemuel, stakeholders need assurance. There's a plan. The plan is you inherit when I die. Not before. Stop creating confusion. Maybe you should consider making it sooner rather than later. His voice had that edge now, the smooth veneer cracking. For everyone's sake, I left before saying something I'd regret. The office felt different now. Other employees had started noticing the tension. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. The atmosphere had soured, poisoned by whatever narrative Wesley was spreading. Late February brought another confrontation. I'd been working until 9 most evenings, deliberately avoiding the townhouse. When I finally returned that Thursday night, Wesley was waiting in the living room, not reading, not watching television, just sitting in the armchair by the window, clearly waiting for me. We need to talk about your role in the company. I hung my coat slowly, buying time to control my response. I'm not interested in this conversation again. You're becoming a burden. He stood, blocking my path to the stairs. Operations are suffering because you won't delegate. Delegate or surrender. Call it what you want. Maybe it's time to rest. Enjoy retirement. Travel. Whatever people do when they stop working. I met his eyes directly. That sounds less like advice and more like a push. Take it however you want. His voice dropped lower, almost threatening. Things are going to change one way or another. Catherine appeared in the hallway then, drawn by our raised voices. She stood beside Wesley, not between us. Her silence spoke volumes. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, saw how she'd positioned herself physically